Hello, this is the Torg Eternity Delphi Council Debriefings where the storm has a name. We are your hosts, Leamon, Jay, and Mark, and we are hoping that this recording goes well because we've already talked about this topic.
Take two.
Take two, right. So today we will be discussing Orrosh cultures. We'll be getting into the Victorians, the other cultures on Gaia, um, which came over the Maelstrom Bridge along with the Victorians. We'll talk about some core Earth stuff and just dig into it for game masters and for players who are wishing to play characters from Orrorsh. Before we dig into that, though, we do want to encourage you to write us at torgdcd@gmail.com. We'll read your emails in a future episode, answer questions you might have, comment on your comments, etc. So, having gotten those formalities out of the way, let's talk about the Victorians themselves. So, Jay, what are your thoughts on the Victorian culture of Orrorsh, and what should people keep in mind and remember?
Well, Victorians are probably one of the easier um, other realities for people to role play because there's been so many examples of it. Things like Penny Dreadful or even like Van Helsing, stuff. Dracula's all like the Hammer horror films, all that classic kind of horror sort of things. It gives people a good intro to it, but it is worth noting that Victorian England, which is where all this other stuff that we're used to, is different than Victoria as far as Orrorsh is concerned. It's a totally different type of land. They're not, I mean, they are English, but they're not the English that we know them. They had a large empire, but it wasn't the same kind of like colonies. There was more of like a trade empire. So while they had influence around the world, it's not like they actually controlled everything, kind of like in more like they did in the real world. So that gives them kind of a different stance in how they deal with people. Additionally, we'll get into it later, but many other cultures on Gaia fell to the Gaunt Man, and gradually over time, these great empires shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, and the survivors all kind of ended up in Victoria. So you do have people from other cultures there as well. But if we're talking about the Victorians themselves specifically, and Victorians from Gaia, because there's some case to be made about Indians or Sri Lankans or people in like from core Earth that have transformed to Orrosh are kind of Victorians now. But just to delineate, I'm talking about like a OG from Gaia Victorians. The big thing about them is their society. It's a very strict, stiff upper lip society where you basically must resist temptation. It's got a strict hierarchy and ways you're supposed to act. Much of it is based off the Sacellum, their interpretation of the religion, which as far as slight spoilers, but not really, I guess. The religion has sort of been molded by the Gaunt Man to get rid of many of the the love and the hope and things of Christianity, and have replaced it with this really harsh puritanical religion that's very effective and flashy as far as the miracles fighting monsters, but overall it leaves society brittle and unable to bend. And because it's so brittle, their society has cracks all throughout it. And that's where the secret societies come in. There's because things are so strict, they need a pressure release valve. And so you've got nobles or, just generally anyone joining just secret societies. People might be members of multiple secret societies just to go blow off steam. And some of them are just the equivalent of like a drinking club. where people get together and drink or do other things. But some of them lead to darker places. They lead to the occult, to monster slayers, seances, and some of them eventually lead to corruption. So it's kind of like the Gaunt Man has set this whole society up to have a constant supply of new nightmares as people become corrupted by the darkness, just trying to live their lives. So, as a Victorian character, it's an interesting thing because you'll come into these possibility wars knowing that the Victorian way is correct. You've trained and you've worked at it this whole time, but you start to see things that suddenly what you've taken for granted might not be true. So you really have to start thinking, how does that affect your character as Victorian? You've always had sort of a superiority complex because you thought you were the last survivors, you know what you're doing, but is it actually true? And that can actually lead to some interesting role play. Also, regarding the whole stiff upper lip thing and the superiority mindset, try not to be too much of a dick when you're playing your character, because while it's oftentimes, yes, something might be in character, it's not necessarily good for what's at the table. And you do have to remember, like I mentioned, the Victorians of Torg are different than the Victorians of the real world. They're still like factories filled with lack of safety equipment and people essentially being wage slaves. And it's not a good place necessarily, but it's also not as harsh as it necessarily could have been in as far as dealing with other people and other cultures. Now they find themselves in this sea of new people. So they really have a different way of looking at things now. So just keep that in mind. Don't try to use being Victorian as an excuse to be a dick.
Mark, your thoughts on the Victorians?
So I'll start with that last point first. Don't be a dick, because the Victorians do have the stiff upper lip, the air of superiority, because they believe that they are. The caste society very much is in place for those that have come over the bridge from Gaia, and they believe, and they're supremely in the minority on the continent in Core Earth, and they still believe they're better than everybody else, and that's okay to role play that to a degree. But with the don't be a dick thing going on, sometimes it's good to let the lesser folk try their path and learn that some people know what they're doing, and that's the excuse you can use for the role playing aspect of why you're I think I'm right, I'm the Victorian, and I would be a dick in this case, but instead of being a dick, I'm just going to let them okay, so just kind of stop talking and let them wave, keep your nose in the air and let them do their thing. And you players know, as a player, I know that their idea is probably going to work out fine, and I'm just not creating tension at the table amongst the players by role playing and using role playing as an excuse to beat somebody over the head with, well, that's what I would do. So there's your out as a player. Say, okay, well, we're just going to let them do their thing. So the Victorians, from the standpoint of who the Victorians are, gaslight horror, really, Trent, to me, Cthulhu by Gaslight kind of thing, that 1880 whatever, I can't remember what that is, but that old school horror gaslight approach works really, really well in Orrosh, in my opinion. Technology levels not super high. It's got that same kind of parallel to Gaslight, and it works and translates real well. The people, the Victorians themselves, they are coming over the bridge. They're a lot like the folks who followed Jean Malraux and came in the cyber papacy, in that they really do know how to fight the Gaunt Man's horrors. They've been doing it for a long time, and they're the ones that are on the Delphi Council side. they do know what they're doing most of the time. But as Jay pointed out, sometimes there's a revelation that the things that they thought were a certain way aren't really that way at all. And what they've been doing has really been a trap the Gaunt Man has set just to watch them fall from grace. And because to him, that's even more delicious than just outright scaring the hell out of them. So that, you can play through that, but they do know how to fight the horrors on the surface for the most part. So from the standpoint of their air of superiority, it comes because they know what they're doing most of the time. um, I would say that the other theme that needs to run throughout Orrosh for the Victorians is that everything centers around either resisting corruption or succumbing to it. There's a ton of I don't want to say it's all black and white, or there's not any room for gray areas in that, because the gray areas are a lot of fun to dabble in and present people with those horrible moral choices where there's no good way to go, and I've only got these two choices to go, and that's bad, and which one do I think is the lesser of the evils, and that's the one I'm going to pick. That's commonplace for Victorians, and they just, that's kind of why they're, everything is shades of gray and dull and dingy and emotionally suppressed, just because if you don't, you know, put that down a little bit, then it's easier to get knocked off your horse when you're happy. If you're not really ever happy, then you can't become unhappy so much. So corruption's always a thing. I would always see that there, but that, going back to that caste thing with the Victorians, there's always two faces. In my opinion, there's always two faces to the Victorians. There's the one that you see in public, and it's always stiff upper lip, proper, doing the right thing, standing firm, and we're going to resist this. But then there's the one you don't get to see, that only the private people see. Colonel Ballard is, Billy to the people who see his private face. William Ballard, Colonel, retired, Billy to the people who know him, right? That, so there's that behind and that's where your secret societies come in, where this is what we present to everybody. We go, we had in take one, we had a big discussion about Sacculum versus Sassalum, and I looked it up. It's Sassalum. I hate that, but anyway, I'm working on it. I'm in recovery. There's, everybody's a good upstanding member of the Sassalum in their public face, but when you get into the brownstone where they think nobody sees because the doors are all locked, suddenly you discover that their private face is very different, and the occult comes out. And if anybody found out, oh, the horror, that would be a scandal, right, et cetera, et cetera. So you got those two faces you can always play off of. I would run with that and the corruption thing going on, and just that they do know what they're doing in fighting the horrors.
Yeah, so I will say Sacellum, because my Latin uh, degree will not let me say Sacellum, because that's medieval Latin, not classical Latin. So, but a couple of things to piggyback off of what you both said. The sense of superiority, as Jay said, they weren't colonizers, so it weren't, we're the best because we've subjected all these others to our whims. It's because of that refugee situation on Gaia, where all these other empires were falling and their refugees kept going and going to Victoria, as Jay said, the area of freeness, I guess you could say, of non-completely taken over by the Gaunt Man, started getting smaller and smaller, and the place that was left was Victoria, which is on that Earth facsimile of Gaia was where England is. So they've come into it thinking their society was the last standing one on Gaia. They come over to Earth. They land in India, which is mostly pure zones, which all seems like Orrorsh, and they're like, oh, these people have lost everywhere that Orrorshes came. So they also bring that as a, hey, look, core Earthers, we held out, we have the knowledge, we have, the miracles, the religion, etc. So that's kind of how they they see things. And as well as once they start encountering people from different realities, they just kind of like, oh, you got it easy. Oh, not Nile Empire, don't even get me started on that invasion.
That may be
Live it,
Tharkle.
yeah, Tharkle might be a close, but anything else is just like, oh, come on, you don't have anything to say about an invasion. You're boxing with the kitty gloves over there. We're doing the real fighting over here. And with the Gaunt Man manipulating the main religion, he has taken away all of the love, the understanding, and has brought in the wrath, the big flashy things. Foul demon, you will, burn in hell and call down, you know, hellstorms and stuff to destroy the nightmares, which works to a degree. But along with the whole stiff upper lip, we know what we're doing. There's very little retreat. And when there's very little retreat, then, and a extra thing that priests think is their goal is to be a martyr. And if they're going to fight a horror, they're going to die or that horror is going to die. And every priest that dies, Victorian go down by a person that could do something against that. So instead of retreating, building up strength, figuring out other things, they end up dying. And again, the whole thing is set up in a neat fear. You leave somebody to survive, because if you kill everybody, then nobody can spread that story of fear. A lot like the glory tales that Storm Knights do. They do glory actions, and then they can spread that tale to get that possibility energy refilled into the people. The fear kind of does an inverse effect where that fear spreads, and then that also builds up a possibility energy, but not to renew and invigorate the populace, but to be sucked away into the darkness device. So that's all pretty good to keep in mind when you're running or playing a character. So let's talk about we talked about it a little bit, and there isn't very much in the source book, but let's try to dig in a little bit for the other cultures on Gaia that have come across. So Jay, what are your thoughts there?
Okay, so going through the source book, the main ones would be there's the Gauls, so essentially the French. Um, there's not really very much. They used to be, enemies with the Victorians, as France and England are wont to be, right? And they would fight them, and they would fight the Romans, and they would be known as fierce and dogged warriors, which always makes me, even though I know it's the wrong time period, makes me think of Asterix. Uh, so, but they're obviously further ahead than that. But they eventually had to leave and evacuate and head to Victoria. So they probably are really eating a lot of crow. Like they're having to live with their longtime rivals. But as we've often seen, like the longest of rivals can suddenly become the fastest of friends when you're really pushed against it. So there's very little info on them, but I'm sure like if you want to make like a proud warrior or even an aristocrat, a Gaul would be good if you want to be slightly different than the standard Victorians. Then you've got the Romans, which much like the Victorians didn't actually conquer as much as they did in the real world. The Roman Empire didn't get as far, but it also didn't collapse and split in two like it did in real life. So in this case, I mean, they did collapse, I guess, eventually because they had to retreat. But the big interesting thing here is that apparently they're the ones mostly responsible for the steam power, like sort of mad science kind of stuff. There is like low key steampunk in Orrorsh, not like full like crazy steampunk, but just sort of like Jules Verne, a touch of it. There may be a Nautilus out there. There might be some other machines, anything that could make Frankenstein's monster. So there's this sort of like strange occult science, which is what the Gaunt Man himself actually focuses on, it seems. That's what he uses. So these Romans had kind of like the highest technical aptitude, it seems, of all of the cultures. And so that's where you're going to see there's like the steam, like it's like the mechanical limbs, and you can get submarines and things like that. I know Greg mentioned previously something about underwater colonies, but personally, I don't want to see it go crazy steampunk, but just a little, just enough for a taste. And so if you want to be an engineer or have something to do with that, then being one of these Romans might be a good way to do that. Whether they are, I imagine they're still following the Sicellum, that they were Christianized Romans. I doubt there's any like ancient Roman god cults. But then again, this is a land of secret societies, so there might still be a cult of Jupiter or something like that. Who knows? Then you've got the Rajani, which is kind of interesting, actually, because it's the Gaean version of India, essentially. I believe in classic Torg, it was just called Raj, but in here is the Rajan kingdom. And so, interestingly enough, like they see similarities in core Earth, India, and vice versa, which can get an interesting situation where you've got some Rajani from Gaia who's acting more like a core Earth like person from India than an Indian person who transformed and essentially became Victorian. And there's also been some talk of the religion too. So that's one of the interesting things about Leamon briefly mentioned it. I think we'll probably get to it later about not necessarily changing your religion when you transform. So the Sicellum might have some more competition now, and maybe some previously suppressed religions from Gaia might also make a bit of a resurgence. And then finally, there's the indigenous, which were the people, the various tribes in North America. That's where the Gaunt Man first showed up in the Grand Canyon, and everything came from there. So most people would think like everyone over there was corrupted or evil. They probably didn't know too much about the land over there, although there were Victorian trade settlements. So there might be a few, but the thing is, when you get to this kind of point, there's so few of them. I don't know. Someone might want to play one, but they should. If you encounter someone in your campaign that's Gaian indigenous, it would be like a miracle. Like they're so rare. But they would definitely have quite the story, depending. Like they might have been someone who still grew up on Victoria. Maybe they were smuggled out of like one of the falling colonies, like at the very, when Victorians' influence on North America. I can't remember what they call it there. The Bellas, yeah. So when Victorian influence over there waned and they retreated, maybe like some survivors were brought over, or maybe this is someone who managed to get across themselves somehow. Who knows? But yeah, very, very rare. But there's a lot of other options other than just ye old Victorian in Torg Eternity, which is one of the big differences in Eternity versus Classic Torg, and I really enjoy it.
Mark, your thoughts on any of the other cultures and peoples of Gaia?
So we, rightly or wrongly, because classic Torg was almost exclusively what we would consider the Victorians, the English. That was, they were mentioned, but that was mostly what we had in the game. We still, while we get mention of them, of the other cultures, they don't make much of an appearance in Torg Eternity, or have not to this point, beyond the paragraphs that you get in the Orrosh book. As Jay pointed out, you have to understand when you're looking at these other cultures that everybody who came over from Gaia is such a small minority of the people that are on the continent that or in core Earth anywhere, whether they're in their space or in just out and about in other cosms. Um, that these individual subcultures that came across from Gaia are as small a minority to the Victorians as the Victorians are to everything else where they are. So having a team of Storm Knights that are all Rajani or Indigents or Gauls or Romans, you could do it. It would be fun. It would be interesting, but it would be anachronistic to the game system for the number of people that you have in the Victorian group having come across the bridge as refugees. So your Cosm, you get to run it the way you want to. From the way that official Torg places it, having a whole bunch of like a village of indigents in one spot would be just like, no, that's not how that works. There're just not enough of them to have come across. The lone survivor idea for these various cultures works really well in the idea that they came across the bridge to escape the destruction that's happening over there, and so you end up with this one very unique individual, fish out of water kind of thing, running around who has this lone survivor tale from a role playing standpoint. Um, I, Other than that, I mean, you really can play them any way you want. You could, if you wanted to, if you're big on the Gauls like Asterisk and Ubelix and want to go down that road, you can. If you want to do the Rajani, you can. If you want to do the Romans and put a minor, I think Leamon may get into this in a little bit, but absolutely, this is not a license to do steampunk. It's not what Orrorsh is, but the Romans do have that capability to, if that appeals to you, to have that kind of an alchemist or an engineer or whatever you want to call it in the game, from Rome. That's other flavors that just haven't been explored, and because that actually works in a game master's favor, because there's so little that's actually been written about in Torg Eternity. You have a blank slate. You can do whatever you want. Um, some game masters can't run with that much freedom because they're like, well, I need you to tell me, well, what about this? Or I have questions. What about this? What about this? What about this? Well, what weapons do they have? Or what do they do this? Or how do they think about the Sassalum? Or how do they interact this out? You get to make that all up out of whole cloth. It's your Cosm, run it. There is no wrong way to do it. So however you want to run it, whatever fits the story you're telling, do that. Other than that, they don't really get a lot of play. So I don't, beyond what you have on page 58, 57, 58, I don't think there's a wrong way to do them.
Yeah, I'll just add. I like thinking of it as remnants of remnants. So the Victorians are remnants, and the other cultures are the remnants of remnants, but they still are there. To kind of expand on things, also, Gaia is not core Earth, but it is a facsimile. So on Gaia, there were some creatures and some of the myths and stuff that we have on core Earth, but don't necessarily exist on core Earth, might have existed over there. And even with the possibility of wars having more cryptids and things be seen and being, you could say, rediscovered or confirmed. I guess confirmed would be a better word. Here is the Bigfoot corpse. That
Yeah.
type of a thing. That Torg Eternity isn't these invaders come in and they bring core Earth myths and legends to life. They come in and they impose their own axioms and world laws on the areas that they control. And some, or most, I would think. I think I was trying to figure out, maybe living land, because they haven't really given a map or anything. might not be a oh, what do I want to say? Might not be a Earth facsimile, although who knows? It could be
An
some,
analog.
yeah,
Well, we know
analog.
Isle isn't.
Yeah, Isles of the Donut, Pan Pacifica Marketplace is a little bit different, but then you have Terra from Nile Empire. You have the Tharcold. It was was an Earth analog, and then Cyber Papacy. So there's lots more analogs out there, and the Gaunt Man having conquered an untold number of other cosms, a lot of those would have been analog Earths that had actual creatures that we would consider myths that either were evil or easily corrupted or which were good and got corrupted, because that's another thing the Gaunt Man loves. He would rather a good, pure person get corrupted than just, oh, I added another evil guy to my army. Um, they can bring, he brought all of those horrors, nightmares, creatures, threats, etc. across the bridge, which invokes the idea that these legends and myths have happened. So that's how you will get things that look like uh, creatures and stuff from ancient myths of India, but they're not from core Earth myths. They're from that analog myth. So just to kind of point that out, how certain things might seem one way or might seem another way. And why I brought that up is, as Jay was saying, the Rajani, they come over and they're not exactly how the Indians are on core Earth, and even the transformed uh, Indians would be who become Orrosh. They still sort of have their own memories of core Earth. They might not be able to explain how a computer works, but they would be able to point to one and say that's a computer. You ask them, "Oh, how do you turn it on?" No clue, no idea. They would know who their mom and dads are and things like that, and their religion, as we talked about. If you know they're if they go through uh, Muslim or Hindu or whatever, they can keep that. Just transforming doesn't automatically change your religion. It's not like either the cyber papacy, which has the law of the one true way, or the Nile Empire, which Mobius set up the big radio broadcast thing that converted everybody to Amatism, etc. So you have more core Earth people that who survived the night of
Yeah.
Screams, because a ton of people died on the night of Screams. Those that were left probably at some point transformed, because most of Orrorsh on core Earth is pure zones, so you're getting a lot more transformations as well as a greater percentage of people transforming. Just because they transform doesn't make them Victorian. They can keep their own uh, religion, or they don't go for the Secellum, whatever you want to say, but they can still be those core Earth religions. But as Mark said, face-wise, when you have all of your modern weapons and stuff not working at all, and the only people whose weapons and magic and miracles, at least at the beginning, work are the Victorians, and they come into areas, especially in the night of Screams, where that whole region was basically wiped out. They came in there and they established and put their religion down. So people who move there or who come across from other cultures and that, they're going to present themselves as being faithful Sekellum parishioners, but in those secret societies and stuff, they could have that private face or that secret society face going on. So I think that is just so much and so many paths that you can do with Orrorsh. Don't just look at it going, "Oh, Victorian," flat out. There's a lot of things, and if you keep things rare, then I think it provides a big impact. When we We're talking about the Romans and their steampunkish type contraptions. Not it's kind of like in here in the real world there's those robot dogs that look all weird and have like the backwards legs and stuff. They're a thing, but it's not like everybody owns one as a pet. So that's kind of how I would
Yet.
see yeah, right. That's how I would kind of see the steampunk aspects of Orrorsh. It's known, people know about it, but it's not like Isle magical brooms that sweep your house that every other person has. It's something different. It's something unique. So even to those from Orrosh will look at it and it won't be a common thing like a Star Wars droid, going across. Everybody understands it. No, you would understand it, but you would still turn, you'd still look, you'd still point, you'd still uh, comment on it. So let's switch over to the core Earth. What's left, and how the core Earth people are able, if they're able, to deal with being in Orrorsh. So Jay, what are your thoughts on those from core Earth?
So you mean like the untransformed?
Yes, the untransformed.
Well, they're in a bit of a pickle. So, considering most of the countries are are pure zones, there's just a few dominant zones at the like north and south, and then the only mixed zones are mixed or slash Pan Pacifica. So it's not really that big of a break for you. So a lot of people have transformed. So a lot of everything has transformed because it's a pure zone. Like by month 3, pretty much everything has transformed to Gaean. So anyone who's still core Earth is in a hard point, pretty much, or a Storm Knight. So the hard points also, like, some of them are actually doing fairly well. I can't remember if it was Jakarta or Delhi. It was Jakarta. Anyway, like that, they're able to use their core Earth knowledge to get around the axiom limits. So, like with the telegram system, they've basically set it up to transmit in bursts and use them as modems. So they actually are able to communicate on remotely with computers through the Orrorsh telegram system. So it's got this whole extra level to it. They're able to utilize the axioms in ways that people from Orrorsh would never even have dreamed of. But it's some of the cities are very patchwork. Some of them have power and these telegraphs, and it's great. Some of them have a power plant that technically works, but it's not connected to anything because it may be a hard point, but there's nothing in between it and the other hard point. So the other hard point gets no power. And then you've got a city that used to be like tens of millions of people. Many of them died. Many of those who died then rose up as other things, right? And are skulking around in the night. And the survivors are in these hard points that keep getting smaller and smaller. But I imagine they're still proud defenders, and they don't want to leave their home. And even if they could leave their home, where are they going? Orrorsh has some of the worst reality storms. Even though there's multiple adventures of regular people sailing through them, you would not do that. It would be pretty foolish, I would think. But there is still trade within Orrorsh, though, because the actual cape is still like within the boundary of the reality storm. So there is still naval trade if you don't want to go through the horrors of the continent. Of course, we do know there's horrors in the water as well, so nothing is really safe. I would imagine if you want to play as a untransformed core Earth character in Orrorsh, you are going to want to have a very good reason for leaving, because I would imagine you're mainly there because of your friends and especially your family at this point. But I think the core Earth sort of way of changing things around and using things in their inspiration and hope to adapt in ways that other realities can't can actually really help. And they'll bring new things that the Gauntman wasn't even expecting. One of my favorite things is they do mention there is I forgot now since it's been a week, but there is a film production company. Like they have their sort of like Bollywood uh, film crew, kind of like they do in the Nile Empire. In the Nile Empire, it's very much Mobius propaganda, but in Orrorsh, it's actually like core Earth propaganda, like against the invaders, and that's been a very popular thing. So you're gonna. I've run characters that are like Bollywood stuntmen who became monster hunters, and there's all kinds of interesting things that you can use from real life as inspiration. One thing I wanted to mention, actually, which I forgot to last time, is they do mention, even for the transformed people, is that in India in the past, we've talked about the caste system as far as Victorians go, but in India is pretty infamous for having a very rigid caste system. In the source book, it does mention, and that in just as in real life, it has been lessened significantly. There are still some old timers that really think about it a lot, but for the most part, it still exists, but it's not huge. And it does mention specifically that when the axioms changed and the social axiom went down, this didn't really change. So you don't like, there's been some fear from people that, oh, now there's going to be this huge caste system and now I can't, if I'm this caste, I won't be able to do anything. But no, apparently, even in transformed India, it's not that big of a deal now. You might get like a horror or like a nightmare or something that references it, but generally speaking, I guess when you lose a large percentage of your population, you can't really afford to. It's kind of, in some ways, might be turning the core Earth survivors and the Gaean refugees into an analog of the race in Tharcold in some ways. And as long as they can learn to all work together, maybe there's a future there.
Mark, your thoughts on the core Earth survivors?
So the people of Orrorsh, they kind of approach things a little differently, and but they look like us. They just look a little bit. I don't want to say backwards, but retro. Just, I mean, that whole gaslight, that whole Victorian traveling in time kind of thing. For a core Earther, as Jay pointed out, you really have to have a reason to be there, because with as many pure zones as there are in this region, it's very difficult to remain untransformed. You're going to have some kind of a base of operation that has an anchor to core Earth, because it's your fallback. If you step out into the zone and you disconnect, you can't be far away from whatever it is that is your anchor, because otherwise you're going to transform, and you really don't want to, because as a core Earther, you see what it is and you can recognize what it is, what Orrosh is, and you don't want any of that because it's horrible. You see while the Victorians coming over the bridge, many of them are refugees fleeing the Gauntman and are here to help and can help. Many more of them are not. They are allies of the Gauntman, and it's very difficult to tell them apart, because they have a public face and a private face. And that's part of what makes Orrosh so much fun to run, is that you can have an Orrosh refugee standing right next to an Orrosh and Gauntman ally, and they look and present in the public face just exactly the same. And if you don't ever get past that first layer of public appearance, you're never going to tell them apart, because they look the same. You have to get behind that facade into that private life, either through skullduggery or force or whatever. And then you can say, oh, that's a bad guy and that's a good guy. these folks are more like I know they're not colonizers per se, they're refugees, but think of them like colonial England. They had a great naval empire. They were the sun never set on the English Empire, which is part of the reason why they have that stiff upper lip and that we're better than you, because we have that whole, we owned everything. England for a time thought we own everything. Everything worth owning, we own. And why would your thing is second, it's second class. We don't otherwise if it was top shelf, we'd own it. We don't own it, so it's not. And that's their approach. For core earthers, you, that comes off as arrogance and pride, and the Victorians would go, well, it's not prideful if you can do it, not arrogance if you can do it. But to the core earthers, it's I don't want to say a necessary evil because not everybody's evil, but the people you have to recognize the idea that core Earth knows who the Gaunt Man is. The Gaunt Man is the general in charge of the invasion. He's the one that's brought this to our doorstep, and he's here for a purpose, and he's good at what he does. In fact, he's the best of the High Lords at what he does. You could make a case for some of the other High Lords maybe being better than him, but not as experienced and crafty as the Gaunt Man. The Gaunt Man's flat out is the biggest threat that we face, from a core standpoint. So the core Earthers here, you have to recognize that being in Orrosh, that's taking on the big bad in his home turf, and learning things about what he does is valuable to the war effort, to resisting the overall invasion. And so figuring out how Orrosh works, figuring out how the Gaunt Man motivates his allies, figuring out how he corrupts the good people and why that's so valuable to him. Those are all valuable things for core Earth people to learn. And so there's a real good motivation for why Delphi Council core Earth realm runners are here in Orrosh. Um, it's just a good that's just a good motivation for I need to figure this thing out, whatever this thing is. You can pick nightmare trees, you can pick nightmares, the Sassalum and how they do their stuff, how alchemy works, how occult magic works. All of this stuff is all a good reason for a core earther to be here. In fact, I did one of my first adventures I did was rooting out Orrorsh, and one of the characters in it, his whole thing was he was a realm runner, taking people who were core in the beginning of the like year one, beginning of the invasion, taking core earthers who were like, oh yeah, we want to be horror, we love horror, we want to really be scared. This is a really good thing. So there was this whole tourism industry where they would pull a ship up to the shore right at the edge of the zone and take a party ashore into Orrosh. And if they disconnected or had a problem, put them back in the boat, pull them back into core Earth so that they wouldn't transform. This is a tourism industry, and these people didn't realize that they're risking becoming a what if and or a nothing if they disconnected. They just wanted to be scared for real and see real nightmares, and that was a thing. So there are a lot of reasons you can come up with for a core Earth hero to be in, or just regular people to be in Orrosh, but I wouldn't put them too far away from if they know what they're doing. If they're there for plot armor reasons, okay, fine. But if they're there and they know what they're doing, you kind of have to give them a talisman or a hard point or a soft point collapsing or something that they can use as like their base of operations that allows them to reconnect if they have a problem. That just I don't see how you do it without doing that, given how anchored the Gaunt Man has Orrosh in core Earth.
Yeah, so I'll add to some of what Jay and Mark said with the core earthers. The the zones are mostly pure. And with that transformation, you're going to have your core Earth, non-Storm Knight core Earthers who are in those hard points. And what the Gaunt Man um, likes to do is destroy a hard point and have a few survivors be able to run to the next hard point. Because then they'll go to the next hard point and then they'll tell everybody that horrible thing that happened to their hard point and get everybody afraid, get that possibility energy in that twisted, warped way generating, and then he has a new area to come in
Mm-hmm.
with more possibility energy to harvest into his darkness device. So within Orrosh itself, your core Earthers are going to be people fleeing from Orrosh, trying to get out or trying to get to another hard point or to some area that somebody's told them is safe, whether that area is safe or not. But the Storm Knights, their need to go there, as Mark had said, the biggest, baddest guy is in Orrosh, and you're going to have to go there to defeat him. You're going to have to go there to push back in the invasion. That's the ultimate kind of goal, the end game, so to speak. So with your core Earth Storm Knights, there is reasons. I know Jay and myself have talked in original Torg. Um, Orrorsh was everybody was almost afraid to go there because you're just Storm Knights go there to die,
Mm-hmm.
and most without the perk system, everything from Orrosh was bad, even the world laws. And in the old system, you brought your world laws instead of just being affected by the ones that you're in. So if you were from Orrosh, you were kind of hurting yourself just to begin with by having all those bad world laws, even when you're in other places and nobody wanted to go there because the there was tons of things. Marked for death was a certain thing that would happen that like you couldn't soak while you were marked for death. And you would generate these points, and I remember feeling like Oprah going, and you're marked for death, and you're marked for death, and you're marked for death, and just like pointing at the party, marking everybody for death. It's not that extreme. I will say if you're going into Orrorsh, you can't play, or I guess you could. Uh, I would highly recommend you not play as if you're going into the Nile Empire with guns blazing, because even if you kill that nightmare, he's going to come back and he's going to have an extra possibility that refresh because you didn't learn his true death. So Orrosh, I see Orrosh as you need to have a heavy investigation aspect of it as you're finding out the secrets. You find the secrets to the nightmares, and that's what the Storm Knights are going to be doing, and the reason that they are in Orrosh. Um, so I think that is pretty well everything that I can think of. But I'll go through Jay and Mark to see if you have any extra things. So Jay.
I think the one thing that came back to me is it's kind of to do with all of the groups is that after the night/week of nightmares, um, much and then the transformation of the land around them, much of the area is uninhabited. And so the Victorians that come through the gates, they want somewhere to go to live. And the Indian government, whatever's left of it, is like, we don't want to deal with you guys, you know. But over there, it's everyone died, so you could maybe go take over that village. So now the Victorians, while they are a minority in the countries that they're in, they are filling out into needed niches. They're taking over abandoned forts or forts that didn't even exist until the transformation. They're becoming farmers. And although maybe some of the locals don't agree with the diet, they don't want to eat bangers and mash all day, but now you've got living people growing food, right? And raising crops. And now even like the Indian government or like the other core earthers who are stuck in these hard points, they need to deal with either the transformed citizens or the Victorians to survive. Like they need food to come in, right? They can't just send people out of the safe zone to go scavenge because they might transform and then they can't really even come back. So there's this whole strange economy, and the Victorians have just sort of like fit themselves right in there. And it kind of goes back to how they were a trade empire back on Gaia, not a conquest empire so much. I'm sure they did some, but so you can kind of see them kind of almost insinuating themselves all over the place. And the other big thing that I wanted to mention was the rail lines. Is that there already was rail lines, of course, in India. They pack them in when they're traveling on rail in real life, but the rail lines would have just transformed and still exist, and so they are a huge way of getting around the country or the whole area very quickly in relation to a lot of other transformed realities. Even the Nile Empire, it took Mobius a while to get his going. Obviously, Tharkold has it too, but you could get around India and much of the other areas like Pakistan or Myanmar, relatively decently if you need to. You just pray to God the train doesn't break down, and then you're stuck out in the jungle or a desert or something like that. But again, it's a way that you get all of these different communities are still able to communicate. They're kind of like right on the edge because they can communicate through telegram, maybe even through computers attached to telegrams. They can travel relatively quickly. They've got miracles. Leamon said this before in the other version that that Orrosh's axioms are almost good enough to do everything. Almost. Like the Gauntman has set it just up. So it's interesting that Orrosh is almost, in theory, as capable as Core Earth at doing a lot of things. So as long as there are still these Core Earth holdouts in these hard points that can direct things with their higher social axioms, there's this very different feeling in Orrorsh than a lot of the other areas. Like in the Living Land, there's humans who've transformed, but they generally don't want to have anything to freaking do with the untransformed people because those people are just hanging out with dead things and they're crazy, right? Whereas in Orrosh, they're kind of working together. It's a very different vibe, I think.
Mark, final thoughts from you.
The rail lines, as Jay mentioned, I think are as almost ubiquitous for Orrosh as they are in Nile Empire in an established campaign. You can use them as the quick explanation for how you got from point A to point B and covered large distances. You can use them to have entire adventures on the train going from point A to point B. Lots can be done. I mean, a train is just there's rich fodder on a train in Orrosh. The secret societies we haven't really touched a lot on.
True.
And I don't neglect them, especially with the public face versus the private face. You've got all these people that are, they present their public face one way, and then there's this secret society where they let their hair down and everybody does the things that they're not allowed to do in public, and nobody, it's that the great known secret that nobody talks about. Everybody has it. It's like Paranoia.
I was about to say the exact thing.
Everybody has no secret societies are illegal. Every character has one. That's how you play Paranoia. And I mean, as a player, every player there has a secret society and it's illegal. And if you can get them exposed to the computer, you can whack them. But Orrosh is almost the same way, except that to me, the secret societies are great plot tools that you can use to both hinder and help Storm Knights. Those aren't secret societies aren't just they're not just a bad thing. They're occultists behind the scenes. They're hidden Gnostic groups with knowledge that has been lost to time, and they've been the protectors of this knowledge. And if you can gain their trust, they will reveal to you how to defeat the nightmare, because they know the final secret, or whatever, or make you a better fighter against those nightmares that happen to infest this region, but seem to be resistant to everything else that you've thrown at them to date. They're super great plot twists, and a connection card. Give them a give them somebody who's a member of a secret society, and they've decided to reveal themselves, and see where the players take it. It can be great flavor and do stuff that you didn't see coming. Don't neglect those, because they are there, and they can be useful tools for the GM, either to help or to hinder your Storm Knights.
On that note,
Yep.
one thing, in Torg Retreat, there is a whole section on secret societies with some sample ones. But one of the key things that I learned when I was looking at doing this was India is, in fact, one of the countries with some of the most secret societies. And starting, I think it was in the 90s, in the last few decades, there has been a massive increase in the level of secret societies in India. So in Torg, when Orrosh hit, there was already a ton of them. So now you not only have these Orrorshian secret societies, but the core Earth survivors in the hardpoints are also members of secret societies. So, and
that
then
may
you can
take
imagine
on new powers.
And then you can imagine they start to intermingle, right? So there's all kinds of crazy things that can happen.
Good point there. The last thing I wanted to point out before we end this episode is just to talk about some of the uncanny things that happen in Orrosh, because that's also gonna, if you're playing a character from Orrosh or you're game mastering, to be aware of, is there are strange occurrences happening that you go to work every day, and your work is 2 blocks down, and then you make a left. And one day you wake up and it's not 2 blocks, it's 3 blocks. And where a person who is of the Orrosh reality is just going to be able to do some mental gymnastics and double think, where they're just like, oh, okay, maybe my memory's wrong. It's really going to be eerie, and just get your stomach in a twist if you're from core Earth. If even as Storm Knights, and for Storm Knights from other realities that come in, is just going to be a lot of weird things like that happening. Locations might change. You might meet somebody, an innkeeper or a hotel proprietor, and one day he looks
For a curio shop.
It looks like he's 6'3" and 220, and a guy with a big bushy beard, and the next day it's a 5 foot woman. It's just, you could, and they're gonna greet you like they've greeted you every single day, and it's gonna weird you out if you're from core Earth or from another reality, and Orrorsh is just gonna kind of accept it, because if they don't, they think about it too long, it's going to cause problems with them. So that's just another thing when you're looking through the source book. Look at those areas, and then there's kind of the bleeds and stuff, which we won't get into because we are we're coming to a close. So, having said that, please do email us at torgdcd@gmail.com. Again, you can send us, ask questions. We'll answer your questions to the best of our abilities. You can give comments, and we will comment on those comments. And until next time, we hope you have fun in your own Cosmverse. Bye.